We begin with breaking news from the Federal Reserve on its latest interest rate decision. It comes amid pressure from the White House, more pressure for Fed Chair Jerome Powell to cut rates. It also follows positive new economic data. The U.S. Commerce Department says the U.S. gross domestic product, GDP, surged 3% annually in the second quarter. The rebound reverses a 0.5% dip in the first quarter of this year. The news prompted this Truth Social post from President Trump saying, quote, second quarter GDP just out, 3%, way better than expected, exclamation point. Too late, must now lower the rate. He's continuing that drumbeat, but it doesn't appear that that will be happening now. Despite President Trump's insistence, the Federal Reserve has decided to hold those interest rates steady in an effort to hit its 2% inflation goal. This marks the fifth time this year the Fed has opted to keep the rate unchanged. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady joins us now from the New York Stock Exchange. Kelly, great to see you. You've got the breaking news. The Fed held rates as widely expected. Chair Powell, though, still facing that growing pressure from President Trump. What did this decision say about where we are in the economy?
So, look, I was just reading through the press release that we got seconds ago. What it tells you is the Fed is continuing that wait and see approach, and they want more data to see how these tariffs flow through to the inflation rate. And I'll read you one of the first lines of this press release. It says, quote, inflation remains somewhat elevated. And that's sort of the big thing that they're concerned about. What I did find interesting, this was somewhat expected, but maybe a little bit less expected than the fact that the Fed held rates, is that of the 12 voting members, one was absent for personal reasons, and two did vote against this decision, and that would have been Bowman and Waller. Those have been very vocal critics, and they have said that they want a rate cut, but the rest of those governors did vote with Chair Powell to keep rates unchanged. As you know, though, this isn't the big news, right? The big news is going to come when Chair Powell speaks in roughly a half an hour and he takes questions from reporters.
That's right, Kelly. And in this press release from the Fed, it says the unemployment rate remains low and labor market conditions remain solid. Inflation remains somewhat elevated. We also got new information today on second quarter GDP. Came in better than expected. But, you know, you and I have been digging into the numbers. What does that headline number actually mean beyond the headline?
Right. 3% growth. This is good. We like that much better than that negative growth that we saw in the first quarter. But really what you're seeing, why you saw such a big swing, is the change in imports. In that first quarter, you saw businesses get ahead of that tariff deadline, bring in a lot of goods. You saw imports surge. And when you calculate GDP, a big import number counts against GDP growth. Then April to June, you saw the reverse of that. Imports plummeted because people weren't importing those goods now that the tariffs had hit. So really, when you look at the first half of the year, it's a lot of noise when it comes to tariffs. So I think really what the Fed and businesses and investors are going to be looking at is the third and fourth quarter to really understand how the economy is digesting these tariffs.
And I'm curious, how did consumer spending do? We saw a number, it was a little bit better than it was, but is it strong? How do you read that?
So we saw it above 1% in terms of an increase, and that is up from 0.5% in that first quarter. Generally, though, if you kind of got rid of all the tariff noise, that wouldn't be a very strong number for consumer spending in the quarter. What I did find interesting is what drove a lot of that consumer spending was people buying automobiles. And this is something that you and I have reported on, that people wanted to get those cars ahead of tariffs kicking in. And so that was a big driver of the increase in consumer spending.
And Kelly, at the end of this week, we've got President Trump with his August 1st deadline. He's been saying, quote, August 1st deadline is the August 1st deadline for trade deals. But will this actually hold? We know Treasury Secretary Bessent has also been out talking today.
So from the White House, you never know if it's going to hold, but this does seem to be, especially with a number of deals being made, we are at least going to see some countries face higher tariff rates, if not all, if that deal holds. I think what's going to be really interesting is, are those countries going to lower their prices to ensure that they keep market share, or are companies here importing goods going to have to absorb some of those higher costs and then potentially pass them on to you and me, Joe Lang?
Kelly O'Grady, thank you so much from the NYSE. CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi joins us now. Olivia, thanks for being here. What's the White House saying about all of this economic data?
Well, we just heard from Kevin Hassig. He did an interview with Fox where he said it's a beautiful day in economic data land. They're really touting these GOP numbers that Kelly just broke down, that 3% GDP, which was a good figure for this White House, certainly, especially as we're learning that Fed Chair Jerome Powell did not cut rates, held rates steady in this latest FOMC meeting. Of course, the president also today talking about tariffs specifically, saying that August deadline is holding. They're not going to move it. This is, of course, they moved it from April to July, now extended it to August. The president says it will hold. The president also today announcing new tariffs on India, a 25% tariff on Indian goods imported to the U.S. The important part there is they're a huge trading partner of the United States, but the president also called them out for two extra things. One being, trade barriers that they may have, non-monetary trade barriers that they have in India, that the president says, quote, that they are among the highest and most strenuous and most obnoxious non-monetary trade barriers of any country. But he also called them out for their use of Russian energy. India is one of the top buyers of Russian energy. And of course, as this president is working to get an end to the war in Ukraine, they are using Russian energy and sanctions around that as a negotiating tool. So the president making a little bit of economic news there today, talking about India. And of course, they have 2 days left, August 1st, to come to the table and try to make a deal with the United States before all of these secondary reciprocal tariffs go into a place. So a lot of economic news here today at the White House, Jolene.
Olivia, we're also awaiting President Trump's reaction to the Fed holding interest rates steady, but also today tech companies are partnering with the federal government to make sharing healthcare information easier. How is that going to work? Who's involved?
Well, so we know a couple things. We learned about this yesterday. CBS News exclusively reported this, that President Trump is going to make an announcement later today. Essentially what it is it's an initiative with top tech companies and the White House. And the goal is to improve healthcare data access. So think about when you go to a new doctor, how strenuous and hard it is to bring all of that new information over to a new doctor. If you are a doctor, to search for information, studies, things in the healthcare ecosystem that may help your patients. So what they're announcing today is partnership with top tech companies, to work with the government and Americans who are elderly or disabled, typically the Americans we see on Medicare and Medicaid, and it will help streamline access to that healthcare data. And we know two major companies that will take part in this are Oracle and Microsoft. So a lot of heavyweights, tech heavyweights, behind this new initiative today as the White House looks to pivot towards the healthcare industry as kind of their next their next priority in this administration.
Olivia Rinaldi at the White House, thank you.